picture a martial arts studio in your mind right now. You are probably imagining some really intense combat, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Like people screaming, flying kicks, sweat just flying absolutely everywhere.
Exactly. Just someone trying to absolutely overpower their opponent. It is this very specific, uh, really aggressive image that we have all been conditioned to expect from combat sports.
Right. It is the Hollywood version, or even just what you see on TV tournaments.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But what if the actual secret to mastering a combat art, like the real foundational bedrock of the whole thing, is something completely unexpected? What if the secret is helpfulness?
It is a really striking contradiction when you frame it that way.
It really is.
Because on one hand, you have this environment that is fundamentally dedicated to teaching people how to survive physical conflict. I mean, actual violence. And on the other hand, the philosophy grounding that very practice is deeply rooted in nurturing and, well, caring for others.
And that contradiction is exactly what we are digging into today. We have a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us for this deep dive.
We really do. Some great material here.
Yeah, we are looking at this deep dive blog post titled The Power of Helpfulness in Jiu-Jitsu, a guide to shaping culture. And alongside that, we have a whole pile of actual student reviews and website details from a place called the Self-Defense Academy, or SDA, which is located in Colorado Springs.
Which gives us a great real-world anchor for all these concepts.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission for this deep dive is to figure out how the gentle art of jiu-jitsu uses helpfulness, and not just as a, nice, warm and fuzzy community idea.
Right, not just a nice marketing slogan.
Exactly. We want to see how it acts as a core pillar for building fierce confidence, mastering combat technique, and engineering a truly thriving culture.
And I think to really grasp that, we have to look past the modern televised image of martial arts and examine the actual linguistic roots of these concepts.
Or the word origins.
Yeah, because the connection between helpfulness and martial arts is baked into the very words we use.
Right, let's look at the etymology here. Because I read that part of the source, and it is surprisingly profound when you trace it back.
It really is. So the word help itself comes from the Old English word helpen, which, simply means to assist or support.
Pretty standard stuff.
Right. But if you trace it back even further to the Proto-Germanic root, which is helpenon, it implies something much deeper than just lending a hand.
What does it imply?
It suggests this deep sense of nurturing and providing aid in times of need from a place of genuine care and compassion.
Oh, wow. So it is not just...
It is not about fulfilling an obligation
Right.
or just checking a box. It is about actively wanting to uplift someone else because you recognize their vulnerability.
And then you pair that deeply nurturing concept with the word jujitsu itself. In the source material, it notes that jujitsu literally translates to the art of yielding, or the gentle art.
Right, which sounds like an oxymoron when you are talking about fighting.
Exactly. But it is this idea that you find strength not in overpowering someone, but in adapting to and guiding their energy. I was trying to visualize this idea of yielding, and I think of it like trying to catch a really heavy medicine ball.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Yeah, like if someone throws a heavy medicine ball at you and you just lock your arms and brace for the impact, you are going to get knocked right over.
Yeah, you are taking all that force directly. It is going to physically hurt.
Exactly. But if you yield, if you step back, bend your knees, and kind of absorb the momentum of the ball as you catch it, you end up holding the ball and controlling the energy. You didn't fight the force at all. You adapted to it.
What's fascinating here is how that physical metaphor applies directly to teaching a student.
How so?
Well, in a martial arts context, yielding means an instructor adapts to the unique learning journey and the specific psychological needs of the student in front of them.
So they aren't just barking orders at the front of the room.
Exactly. It is the complete opposite of forcing a rigid, one-size-fits-all curriculum onto a room full of different body types and temperaments. A helpful teacher yields to where the student is mentally, physically, and emotionally, and guides them forward from that exact spot.
That makes a lot of sense.
We see this formalized in systems mentioned in our sources, like the VB method.
Right. Let's pause on that for a second. The VB method is mentioned in the text, but we should probably clarify what that actually is for you, the listener.
That is a great point. So the VB method refers to the Valente brothers method. It is a very specific jiu-jitsu curriculum that fiercely preserves the original self-defense focus of the art, rather than just the modern sport or tournament aspects that we see on TV.
Okay, got it.
And a massive part of that curriculum is the holistic philosophy of the practitioner. It explicitly structures this concept of yielding into the actual pedagogy.
Into the way they teach.
Right. The instructor is taught to yield to the student's learning curve, basically prioritizing their long-term development over short-term physical dominance on the mat.
Which brings us perfectly to one of the founding figures of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mentioned in our sources, who really pioneered this mindset, and that is Helio Gracie.
Oh, absolutely. A legendary figure in the martial arts world. The source text points out that Gracie is famous for adapting traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu to emphasize leverage and technique over brute strength.
And the blog post argues that this adaptation was a profound act of helpfulness because it made the martial art accessible to smaller individuals.
Yes, that is the core argument there.
The idea is that he proved instructors have to be mentors and role models who help students unlock their potential rather than just people who hand out techniques. But I have to push back on this framing just a little bit based on the history.
Okay, let's hear it.
Wait a minute. Gracie was physically a frail guy when he started. He literally changed the mechanics of the sport so he could win against bigger, stronger guys.
That is historically accurate, yeah.
Right. It was a physical necessity for his own survival on the mat to find a way to win. So was that really an act of profound helpfulness? Or was it just a brilliant, self-serving, competitive strategy that just happened to benefit others later?
I see where you're going with that. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the initial internal motivation almost matters less than the structural outcome.
You think so?
I do. Regardless of whether he started tweaking techniques purely to survive a sparring match, the result of his actions was the complete democratization of self-defense.
Democratization.
Okay.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. How exactly does leverage democratize a fight?
Well, by mathematically prioritizing leverage over raw power, he created an inherently inclusive system. Think about the physics of a fulcrum and a lever.
Like a seesaw.
Exactly like a seesaw. If you know where to place your hips and how to isolate an opponent's joint, you just don't need a massive bicep to control them. You are actually using their own body weight against them.
Oh, so the size difference actually becomes a tool you can use.
Precisely. He built a framework where physical disadvantages, like being smaller or not having immense upper body strength, could be systematically overcome through applied physics. He basically proved that technique could conquer size.
That is fascinating when you think about the physics of it.
And by then deciding to teach that system, to share that leverage with the public, he was taking a framework built for his own survival and turning it into a tool for mass empowerment.
Okay, I see your point.
He was famous for saying that the role of an instructor extends far beyond the mat. They have to guide students through physical, mental, and emotional challenges. That is really where the helpfulness shifts from a byproduct to an intentional philosophy.
Yeah, that reframing makes a lot of sense. He didn't just invent a secret weapon and hide it away. He built an entire educational ecosystem around sharing it. So how does that legacy of helpfulness, this art of yielding and empowering, actually manifest today?
To see that, we really have to look at the real-world example in our sources.
Right, the Self-Defense Academy, or SDA, down in Colorado Springs.
Looking at the practical application of this philosophy is where you see how culture is actually engineered in real time.
Let's look at the physical location first, because I love this detail. It is literally downstairs at a co-working space called the Nexus on North Cascade Avenue.
Yeah, that is definitely not your standard setup.
Right away, that is not your typical strip mall dojo with, neon signs and barred windows. And it is run by a head instructor named Professor Flip Aguilar.
And when you read through the pile of reviews for this academy, the word helpfulness isn't just marketing copy. It is a recurring theme in almost every single interaction people have there.
It is very striking how frequently the reviewers highlight the psychological environment over the combat itself.
They really do. People talk about feeling safe before they talk about learning to punch.
And they have this incredibly unique offering that kept popping up in the reviews. It is called Sushi and Self-Defense Classes.
Such a great concept.
Several reviewers, Rachel, Angela, and Chloe, they all specifically mention this. Chloe actually went there for a workplace team bonding event and loved the sushi making part.
Which is such a smart way to get people in the door.
Exactly. And then Angela mentioned she isn't a particularly athletic person and had deep reservations, but said she couldn't recommend the Sushi and Self-Defense class more highly. Rachel called it a great class to teach basic self-defense and finish it off with a great time.
Those specific events are a perfect embodiment of yielding to the community's hesitation.
It is a brilliant psychological tool. I mean, it is like sneaking vegetables into a kid's smoothie.
That is a great way to put it.
You are entirely bypassing their psychological defenses. Because, a traditional martial arts academy is intimidating. You have the smell of sweat, the intense shouting, the fear of injury. People put their guards up immediately.
They go into survival mode before a class even starts.
Right. But when you invite them to roll sushi, they come for the familiar comfort of making food. They are laughing, their guard is down, and once they're in that relaxed state, they are suddenly incredibly open to learning a high-stakes self-defense skill.
And that really speaks to a specific philosophy mentioned in the Academy's materials, the 753 Code.
Let's define that because the numbers themselves sound a bit cryptic.
They do, yeah. The 753 Code is a philosophical framework used in this specific lineage of Jujutsu. The 7 represents the 7 virtues of Bushido, things like rectitude, courage, respect, honesty, honor, loyalty, and crucially for our discussion, benevolence.
Benevolence.
Right. Then the 5 represents the 5 keys to health, and the 3 represents 3 states of mind. But let's really focus on that virtue of benevolence.
How does that tie into the sushi nights?
By stepping outside the traditional rigid bounds of a combat class to host a sushi night, Professor Flip and his wife are demonstrating that benevolence in action. They are yielding to the community's actual needs, creating a holistic approach to personal safety that welcomes people who might never have signed up for a straightforward fighting class.
We see that benevolence extending into their community outreach, too. Like, a reviewer named Dorothy Greek mentioned that Flip came to the Women's Bean Project to teach self-defense techniques.
That is a great initiative.
Yeah, and she was so empowered she was going to teach her kids what she learned. Another reviewer, SB, talked about attending an introductory class sponsored by Silver Key, noting that Flip was very understanding of the physical limitations of the older attendees.
See, that is the Gracie legacy in action right there, adapting the art so that it serves the person rather than forcing the person to contort themselves to serve the art.
Beautifully said.
Whether it is youth programs, which reviewers like Hannah Schubert and Brent Haupt praise for building character and confidence in their kids, or adults finding their courage, the common denominator is an environment of profound systemic support.
Which brings us to the actual blueprint, because the blog post doesn't just talk about helpfulness as this vague, feel-good vibe. It outlines a concrete 4-part blueprint for how to cultivate a helpful culture from the ground up.
This is where it gets really practical.
And honestly, looking at the psychology behind these steps, this applies just as much to managing a corporate team or raising a family as it does to running a jiu-jitsu school. So the source starts by looking at the baseline behavior of the leadership.
Right, because the foundation of any culture is modeling. The text emphasizes that the instructor has to lead by example because students inevitably mirror the behavior of the authority figure in the room.
So the source suggests things like the instructor offering extra time to a struggling student, or intentionally pairing advanced students with day one beginners so they can learn from each other.
Exactly, getting the veterans to mentor the rookies.
But here's where it gets really interesting. If I am paying a premium for an advanced martial arts class, right, and the instructor tells me I have to spend half my time helping a beginner figure out how to tie their belt or do a basic forward roll, isn't that taking away from my own training time? How does that benefit the advanced student?
It is a very natural question, but it actually reveals a pretty common misunderstanding of how true physical mastery is achieved.
Really? How so?
Teaching is a cornerstone of mastery. When you are an advanced student, you might be able to perform a technique automatically purely through muscle memory. You don't even think about it anymore.
No, you just do it.
Exactly. But when you are forced to explain that technique to a beginner, to intellectually deconstruct it into its smallest, most fundamental parts, and answer their unpredictable, awkward questions, it forces you to understand the mechanics on a much deeper conscious level.
Ah, I see. So you can't just rely on habit. If a beginner asks why your hand is positioned a certain way, you have to actually know the physics behind it to explain it to them.
Precisely. A helpful environment creates a self-sustaining ecosystem. The beginner gets personalized, hands-on guidance, which accelerates their learning. But the advanced student gets a masterclass in foundational mechanics. It is mutually beneficial.
That makes perfect sense. But an advanced student's guidance only works if the beginner is actually receptive to it, which means the environment itself has to change.
Right. They have to feel comfortable.
The source highlights the necessity of creating a safe learning environment where the focus is on Learning, not judgment. This is step 2.
And this is a vital psychological shift, especially in a physical discipline. Think about the physiological state of learning.
Okay.
If you walk onto a mat and you are afraid of being judged or afraid of looking foolish, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in. You go into a mild fight or flight state.
Your heart rate goes up.
Exactly. And you physically tense up. If you are tense, you cannot yield. And if you cannot yield, you cannot practice the mechanics of jujitsu effectively.
So safety isn't just about avoiding physical injuries. It is about breeding the physical relaxation necessary to actually absorb information.
Yes. When an instructor strips away the fear of judgment, they are actively changing the neurological state of the room from a combative response to an optimal learning state. Students have to know that asking questions or struggling with a technique is just the natural friction of the learning process, not a personal failure.
Wow. Okay, so building on that psychological safety, the blueprint moves into step 3, peer support.
This is a big one.
It is about promoting a culture where students help each other both inside and outside of class. The source notes that when people feel like they belong to a supportive community, their progress actually accelerates. Why is that?
It comes down to the emotional overhead of anxiety.
Emotional overhead.
Yeah. Learning a martial art is exhausting, both physically and mentally. If you are constantly worried about gym politics or whether you are respected by your peers, a huge portion of your mental bandwidth is tied up in social survival.
Just trying to fit in.
Exactly. When you know your peers have your back, that emotional overhead is removed. You take more risks in your learning. You try the complex new technique because failing doesn't mean ostracization. It just means your partner is going to smile and help you correct your posture.
Which leads to the final and perhaps most culturally impactful piece of the blueprint, step 4, celebrating acts of helpfulness.
Positive reinforcement.
Right. It is about recognizing the students who go out of their way to support others. But how does celebrating helpfulness actually override the deeply ingrained human instinct to compete physically in a combat environment?
By entirely redefining the social hierarchy.
What do you mean?
Well, in a traditional fight gym, the status economy is based entirely on physical dominance. The person who taps everyone out, the person who is the most aggressive, gets the most respect. They are at the top of the social pyramid.
An alpha dog.
Exactly. But when an instructor publicly celebrates helpfulness, they are engineering a new status economy.
They are shifting what the group values.
Exactly. When you publicly praise the advanced belt who stayed late to help a struggling white belt, you are signaling to the entire room that status here is earned through benevolence, not dominance.
That is a huge shift.
It embeds the value into the actual culture of the room. It becomes the thing people strive for just as much as getting their next belt stripe. You actually see this reflected in reviewers like Tai M, who was so proud of earning their first stripe under Flip's encouraging guidance.
Right.
The reward was as much about the supportive journey as it was about the technical achievement.
When you look at those mechanics together, leading by example to deconstruct mastery, creating psychological safety to relax the nervous system, encouraging peer support to remove the anxiety overhead, and celebrating helpfulness to rewire the status economy, you really see a complete paradigm shift.
It is a total transformation of the space.
A martial arts academy transforms from a place where people go purely to learn how to fight into a place where people go to learn how to live better alongside others.
And the text makes this explicit. It argues that the true success of a teacher isn't measured by how well their students perform a martial arts technique in a vacuum. It is measured by how they help those students navigate their own unique paths in life, using the mat as a laboratory for personal growth.
To bring this full circle, the source text leaves us with an incredibly powerful quote from Albert Einstein.
Oh, I love this quote.
It says, 100 times every day I remind myself that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other people, living and dead, and that I must exert myself in order to give in the same measure as I have received and am still receiving.
It is just a profound realization of interdependence. Even a solitary genius like Einstein recognized that survival and progress are collective efforts.
So what does this all mean? It means that this art of yielding isn't just for the dojo. I really want you to think about where you can apply this in your own life.
It is such a practical takeaway.
Where can you stop bracing for impact and start yielding? Where can you step back, absorb the energy of a tense situation at work or a conflict at home, and guide it with helpfulness instead of meeting it with stubborn resistance?
It really changes the entire definition of protection. We usually think of self-defense as a solitary, highly physical act, blocking a punch, escaping a hold, physically surviving a violent encounter.
Right, like we talked about at the beginning.
But consider the broader implications. What if the ultimate form of self-defense isn't fighting at all?
Okay.
What if the absolute greatest protection you can build in your life is a community so deeply rooted in helpfulness, benevolence, and mutual support that you never actually have to face a threat alone?
Wow. That completely shatters that stereotypical image we started with. No screaming, no aggressive posturing, just a community of people learning how to yield, how to help, and realizing that together, they are definitely worth defending. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep yielding, keep helping, and keep exploring.